Namaskar, this is Akhilesh Bhargava. Welcome to Tit-Bits on Business and Finance with me. The Reserve Bank of India is meant to be an independent and autonomous regulator of the banking and financial sector as per our constitution. But every government seeks to undermine its autonomy, authority and independence. Every government, every party in power since independence has been guilty of this particular interference in the affairs and policy making of the RBI. But what we have seen is that during the Modi regime, this kind of interference in the affairs of RBI has been much more. The fact of the matter is that if netas want to interfere in the functioning of the Reserve Bank, it is compliant RBI bosses who are equally to blame for such kind of interference in the autonomy of the RBI. The fact of the matter is that the very thinking and objectives of the government and the RBI are completely different. The Reserve Bank is meant to be prudent, conservative and long-term in its approach. On the other hand, the objectives of the government, of the party in power, are bound to be political, populist and for short-term reasons. The fact still is that an independent and autonomous Reserve Bank is a must for a well-managed and strong economy. And whether you are a developed nation or a developing nation, the Reserve Bank, or the central bank as it is called, needs to be independent and autonomous. There were too many instances, there were too many points of friction and difference of opinion between the RBI and the government, and that finally led to the exit of Urjit Patel as the RBI governor sometime in December 2018 and the appointment of Shri Shaktikanta Das as the RBI governor, clearly a man of comfort of the government. The RBI and the government were not on the same page on many issues, and some of them were demonetization. Such a massive action taken by the government and the RBI was never consulted. Perhaps the RBI would not have been in favor of it. When the Nirav Modi scam broke out, then Finance Minister Shri Arun Jaitley blamed the RBI for its inaction, for its laxity and negligence. Even the CVC blamed poor RBI audits for the Nirav Modi scam and put it on the mat. Project Shashakt was one project initiated in order to come to some kind of resolution of the NPAs in India, and that was by way of a large AMC. Both were again not on the same page. It is the government which kept pressurizing the Reserve Bank to dilute the NPA recognition norms, and they finally got diluted when Mr. Das came on the seat. The government also kept pressurizing the Reserve Bank to relax its prompt corrective action norms which were imposed on those public sector banks which had gone bankrupt. Again, a major pressure point and flare-up point between the RBI and the government. You will also recall how the government raided the Reserve Bank of India and took away 1,72,000 crores, reduced the resources of the RBI, saying they are not needed. It was a huge flare-up between the two. And you will also not forget the Section 7 notice that was issued by the government to the Reserve Bank of India. First time ever. This Section 7 is one where the government can override the RBI and give it directions. In other words, it can completely do away with the autonomy of the RBI. And this was a never before used section. It was used by the government. And of course, from time to time, we always see differences of opinion between the government and the RBI in the matter of policy, monetary policy, interest fixation, etc. Thus, there were too many such instances which had been taking place, with the Reserve Bank tending to be prudent, conservative and long-term, and the government pursuing its own populist and political goals. It is in this background of constant interference in the affairs of the Reserve Bank and policy making by the government and its constant efforts to erode its autonomy and independence that the RBI Governor Mr. Shaktikanta Das in its September 2019 interview clarified the position of the RBI. He says that despite the RBI and the government engaging in free and frank discussions, despite that, the RBI is much more than autonomous. He says that differences of opinion, differences in perspectives persist and happen between the central bank, which is the Reserve Bank, and governments all over the world. But according to him, it is essential to discuss, talk and resolve all these differences of opinion, differences in perspectives. He says that discussion with the government cannot be stopped because according to him, the government is the sovereign. In other words, the government has the upper hand over the RBI. We are not against discussion between the Reserve Bank and the government. They need to engage in a healthy and constant discussion. What is being objected to is dominance over the Reserve Bank by the government such that the government erodes its constitutionally mandated autonomy. Mr. Das further says that you cannot expect the Reserve Bank to go on abusing and lecturing the government on how to manage the economy. We agree with him, but the contra statement is also true. You cannot expect the government also to constantly abuse and lecture the Reserve Bank on how to make its own policy. Both need to respect their independent domains and turfs. In this matter, let's go to the opinion of Dr. Viral Acharya, the former Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank. Dr. Acharya calls this dominance of the Reserve Bank by the government as fiscal dominance. And just as Prime Minister Modi coined the term phone banking, he calls this as phone central banking. In other words, interference in the affairs of the Reserve Bank of India over the phone by the central government. Dr. Acharya further clarified and says that the government constantly pressurizes the Reserve Bank to loosen the regulation of banks and financial institutions. He says that this is done by asking the Reserve Bank pressurizing the RBI to dilute its norms for recognition of NPAs. The RBI is also pressurized to keep interest rates low because that politically suits the government in power. It is also asked to increase liquidity in the system. And finally, he very pertinently points out the RBI is forced to crowd the capital markets with government borrowings because of which, according to him, inadequate or little funds are left for the private sector. The government takes it all. He says that this kind of an interference results in price and financial instability in the system. He says that it is the government which takes away most of the financial savings from the market and leaves very little for the private sector. Because of that, the inefficient balance sheet of the government keeps bulging and expanding, and there is not enough funds left for the growth of the private sector. The private sector gets stifled, according to him. This approach, according to him, of interference in the affairs of the Reserve Bank, of crowding the market with government borrowing, he says it spooks the domestic and foreign investors and keeps them away from the country, keeps them away from investing in the markets. According to Dr. Acharya, the government needs to be committed to fiscal restraint and meeting its targets. And he says the Reserve Bank also must be committed to resisting fiscal dominance of its affairs by the government of India. We of course agree with what Dr. Viral Acharya has to say. Both need to protect each other's turfs, as we said, and both must not interfere in the domain of the other person. But then we are witnessing an era where every autonomous institution has seen its autonomy being eroded by a government in power which has got brute majority. Every constitutional authority's domain has been eroded, and the Reserve Bank of India is no exception. But to us, long-term damage gets done to the economy when the RBI's autonomy and independence gets eroded. After all, it performs a very important function of the monetary policy fixation, regulating funds and currency in the economy. And if the government keeps interfering in it, you can expect policy to be inefficient, to be weak, and not in the best interest of the country, in the interest of the party in power. This is Akhilesh Bhargava signing off till we meet again. Namaskar.
Now be the first to know about the latest updates on our new news app. Go on your Android or iOS, search for HW News Network. Download our app, choose the language you prefer to get updates in, and be up to date with the latest news.
If you like this video, please share it, and we would love to hear your comments in the comments section down here. Also, please do like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter to get minute-to-minute news updates. For more such shows and videos, well, subscribe to our YouTube channel.